Hello, good morning, good afternoon for all our listeners today, and welcome to this year's Global Diversity Guide launch. Now, for those that don't know, the Diversity and Data Guide is powered by Harnham's salary survey, which surveys more than 6,500 professionals across the data industry. We've been doing it for a number of years now, and we've got over 1 million data points that we analyse as part of this as well. I'm very, very fortunate to be joined by two amazing specialists in their field. We've got Amy Foster from Rockborne, and we've got Ewan Dunbar from Harnham. So I'm looking forward to a conversation around some of the statistics in the guide, as well as this year's report, but also talking about some real life examples of initiatives that we're seeing organisations do that are working well, and also to talk a little bit about what we're doing in our business around diversity as well. So a couple of reminders. The Global Diversity Guide is live now, so hopefully you can see a link in the chat, and so do download it and you can see all the details of stuff that we're going to talk about today. You can ask questions. In fact, we encourage it. So do ask questions, and we'll try and get through as many as we can during the conversation today as well. Now, obviously, because the topic is around diversity, we will be talking about gender diversity as part of this as well, and as we should as well. Now, because of the responses that we have had, we're going to be focusing on male and female, so very binary in terms of it. We do hope that as we do this survey going forwards, we'll get more and more responses around non-binary as well, so that we can start analysing this data, and we'll actively encourage more diversity when it comes to the responses as we move forwards as well. So without further ado, let's start with some introductions. So my name is Waseem Ali. I'm going to be hosting today. I've got a career of about 15 years in data across many different industries. Started off as a practitioner in data all the way through to leadership roles. I'm currently the CEO at Rockborne. Rockborne is a company whose purpose is to bring more diversity into data. So this topic is very, very close to my heart, as well as the other two, my other two colleagues on the show. And we are what is known as an attract, train and deploy company. So we hire talented, diverse individuals into the business, take them on a training program in data before deploying them as consultants. Amy, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Thanks, Waseem. Hi, I'm Amy Foster. I'm the Director of Talent at Rockborne. I've worked in the people and talent space across multiple industries for the past 17 years now, and I have a real passion for DE&I. So reading through the survey has been fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to chatting through some of that today. Over to you, Ewan.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. I'm Ewan. So I've been working at Harnham now for coming up to 9 years. 5 years of that in the UK, 3 years of that across the Nordics and the Netherlands, and more recently in a role across the entire group, so focusing on our Harnham offerings, but also Rockborne as well in the UK.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, both, and I look forward to the conversation as well. So look, let's set the scene. Now, diversity is one of the most talked about topics in recent years, and actually one might assume that by now the importance of diversity will be so kind of entrenched and ingrained in our thoughts, in our day-to-day living, in our business practices, that actually conversations like this may not be necessary. And actually the diversity report statistics will have no surprising stats in it. However, that's quite away from the truth, and we'll delve into some of the data as we go through it. So a few headline stats, I guess, to get the conversation started for us. The proportion of female professionals joining the industry at entry level has actually fallen quite a lot this year across the regions. So to give you an example, it was 35% last year in terms of females entering the data industry at entry level, and it's fallen to 11% this year. For the data nerds like me out there, we're comparing like for like, so the number of respondents were roughly equivalent across both years. So it's not that less females have responded or anything like that. It's a like for like comparison on that side as well. So that's in the UK. In the US, we've also seen a fall. It was 36% last year. It's now 12% this year. And the EU was, although there was a decline, it was slightly less severe as compared to the UK and the US. So the EU last year was 37%. Whereas this year it's 34%. Ewan, I'd love your take on this. I know you've been doing this for a few years now, and you've moved between markets as well, as you said in your introduction. What are your initial thoughts on this, especially given your experience in all these regions?
Thanks, Waseem. Yeah, I think the stats were very surprising, to be honest, particularly across the UK and also across the US. It's pretty clear across the globe that it's obviously a very uneven landscape with everything that's been going on, and there's definite signs of progress, but there's also plenty of areas in where there's a massive need of improvement. Massive shout out to the Netherlands. I think it's really impressive what they've been doing in the analytics space, and the fact that 60% of roles at entry level were dominated by female professionals is a massive step up, and just shows what's possible for the UK and the EU. From my experience working in the Netherlands, this is something that's been talked about for a long time. It's something that hiring managers have been really passionate about for longer than I can think in the UK, and they've got ahead of the curve. They've started introducing legal laws, in particular across balancing men and women across large public and private companies. So holding companies accountable from a legal standpoint, but also just putting a lot of effort into how they fill their entry-level positions and making sure that they're hiring the best, but also from a diverse background. So it'll be interesting to see now as time progresses what that's going to look like in 3 years, 5 years, and even 10 years, when hopefully we're still all reporting about that. Obviously, from a Harnham standpoint, we are trying to encourage that as much as we can. So obviously we've just opened an office over there. We've already hosted a diversity event. We do that in the UK and the US as well. And we think it's really important to bring these hiring communities together, because I think ultimately for companies to improve, they need to learn from other companies what's worked and what hasn't, rather working as a team, basically, rather than going individually. And we're trying to aid that as much as we can. In the US and the UK, it's hard to fully understand why, but I think the economic state's probably had some form of impact. Obviously, people have lost their jobs, people have needed second jobs, and people probably, for their own personal circumstances, maybe have had to move further away from data to make sure that they're getting what they need to keep things moving from their side personally. It is worrying, 11%, a massive drop. And hopefully that's not something that continues. I think resources have been very tight, particularly in the UK and the US, and unfortunately that possibly has meant that diversity initiatives have dropped behind certain priorities. Companies are trying to stay afloat. Without those companies, they can't even focus on diversity. So I think it's been a bit of a strap in and let's get through this approach, and hopefully then companies can start to revisit that 2024 and beyond to get those numbers back up to where they were, and then continually start to improve. But yeah, Amy, it'd be good to get your thoughts. Obviously, you're working with the young talent side within the data and AI industry. What do you think?
Yeah, thanks you. And hey, look, getting diversity right at all levels is always going to be challenging. I think what we've tried to do at Rockborne specifically is come at it, I guess, from a slightly different angle, and being recognised recently by Data IQ in this space has really helped reassure us that we're on the right path. I think being aware of stats across the industry in diversity is really important, but what you shouldn't do is then kind of use those to set your own KPIs for your own diversity agenda. I think knowing the numbers is important, but if you treat diversity purely as a numbers game, you never truly achieve an inclusive and diverse workplace. And I think sometimes that's where we see spikes in some areas and not others. Companies will almost sort of go after a certain diversity campaign off the back of some numbers rather than focus on a more holistic approach. If we look at the diversity report over the last 3 years, it has tracked a trend in which the proportion of younger data professionals, so those under the age of 35, have been gradually shrinking across the UK, US and EU. But in 2023, this trend has come to quite an abrupt stop. And in the case of the US and EU, it's even reversed. And I think we've speculated in the past that the shrink could be a consequence of COVID-19, or perhaps it's a sign of a newer industry maturing with the workforce demographic obviously aging slightly as specialisms become more established. However, for me, I feel the U-turn is down to the fact that there are now more ways to get into data. So firstly, more people are coming into the data space from a non-STEM background, and this is something we actually discussed on a LinkedIn Live earlier this year, and it's something that we specifically focus on at Rockborne as well. And I think the other factor for me is obviously that there are other routes now to get into data from a non-university standpoint, such as apprenticeships, so that they are all really helping.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you both for your thoughts, and echoing some of the sentiment at the end there as well. I think there's some great diversity that can happen in organizations when it comes to hiring in technology, data and the likes, and actually we do that at Rockborne. We don't focus on targets as Amy says. I think that can make you complacent in a way, and actually doing it quite authentically and doing it based on the value that a diverse workforce can bring to your business is something that we focus a lot in on, and Amy champions a lot for us as well. So thank you both for your thoughts. What I'd like to I started off with quite a doom and gloom type question, didn't I? I probably should have started off on a more positive note, but it's not all doom and gloom. There are some actually positive signs in the report, especially if we start looking at kind of moving away from early careers and looking into the kind of mid-level type positions, where we have witnessed a little bit of kind of a positive move when it comes to diversity, both in terms of ethnicity and in terms of gender. And again, a couple of examples from the report that I pulled out were the kind of the percentages of workforce in teams moving more towards kind of gender parity. Not quite there, but for mid-level, there was 37% women in technical lead managerial type positions. And that was up from last year, and that number could be up because of the early careers number that we spoke about before. It was higher last year, so we might see people moving into the kind of middle management type positions as time goes on. So that could be a reason in itself. In the US, females occupied 39% of mid-level positions, so still work to do, but getting closer to 50-50 mark there. And in the EU, female representation at a director level has increased from 11% to 15% over the past 12 months. So it clearly work to be done, but progress is being made there as well. And I think there could be a variety of different reasons, certainly from my perspective, and actually COVID, as negative and as bad as it was for people's well-being, it did introduce flexible working more so and more predominant than ever before. I wonder if that could be a change in it. And back to Amy's point earlier, you're seeing more and more people entering the data industry not from typical backgrounds that you would expect to enter from data industries, be it STEM, be it whatever. So we may be seeing career changes coming in as well. I know I've worked on career changes in my past as well, and you get some of the best data people through that route as well. So some positivity there. We are seeing some kind of in the report uneven kind of representation at higher levels. UK and the US, 17% and 6% of females were in leadership positions. EU slightly better. So you had Netherlands at 18%. We spoke about the Netherlands before. France at 24%. I'd love to hear from you, Amy. What do you think? It's promising, obviously, but there is an uneven split at all levels. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree. Certainly on the flexibility point, I think companies need to keep offering that level of flexibility. That does impact, I would say, females slightly more so, particularly because very often they have other commitments and childcare, etc. So it's sad sometimes to hear companies are starting to move back to, let's say, old practices. I think if we really need to keep forward with that, because actually we could harm the progress that has been made. And sometimes what you do see, and this may account for the kind of uneven split, is that flexibility sometimes doesn't come into play until you hit certain levels. So it'd be great to see flexibility across the board through all levels of an organisation, not just offered to those that have, a manager title, etc. I think the other point for me is kind of across the data industry. It's become apparent, I think, more so in recent years, the need for not just a strong technical and data skill set. What we're hearing more and more from clients that we speak to, and through our own experiences, that the focus also has to be on really solid communication, kind of soft skills, business skills, and acumen. And I think that comes into play even more so as you do move up the tree and you become more senior. And I think that can really healthily lend itself to individuals who may not come from the traditional data channels, as you were saying. They may be non-STEM graduates, for example. And all that does is it increases the pool of potential talent, and particularly potential female talent, which in turn is starting to fill those data pipelines and fill those later and leadership roles. Ewan, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just from a UK perspective, there is companies doing some really good stuff. So we're starting to see more and more clients taking real accountability of having a more diverse workforce. So, there's companies releasing 5-year strategies. They're regularly reporting on those either on a 6-month or annual basis, and they're not hiding away from, if it doesn't improve. And obviously, if it improves, then great. But, they are also sharing the challenges. They're releasing reports on what they've done well, where they've struggled, to also help the wider industry as well. Also, speaking to consultancies, some consultancies now are walking away from business if the company's ethos doesn't match their ethos when it comes to diversity. They don't want to put their consultants in that environment. So I think there's some really strong steps being made for other companies to catch up, because ultimately they are going to lose out in a number of different ways.
It's really good to hear about examples like that, as Ewan just mentioned as well. And for me, it's not really a science here, really, is it? It's kind of human to human interaction, and for me, it's all about honesty. It's all about collaboration, and perhaps you can't measure that, but that's what it boils down to, really. So organizations that I feel are thriving in this space or succeeding in this space are ones that are open to being challenged, and that's not only to do with DEI and diversity. That's in all walks of, whether it's technology, whether it's data, whatever it is. If you see an organization who's open to being challenged and open to seeking feedback and advice, I think those are the organizations that typically do well, and that certainly applies in the DEI space. So kind of from my perspective, and the things that I've seen work well, and the advice that I would give for companies is do ask questions and do ask feedback and do ask to be challenged. It's okay not to get it right. Acknowledge that and work on it. But don't be afraid to say that you haven't got it right. Amy, that's something definitely that I've picked up from you as well since you've been here. Any thoughts on that?
No, really very valid points. So often in organisations, I've seen this so much in my career, and sometimes it's been me that's been tasked to do it, is that DEI initiatives are kind of left to those in the HR space to kind of lead and drive. And obviously that can be a very small pool of individuals who won't represent your wider population. So actually you've got to make sure you engage far wider. And that should be coming from, as you said, from conversations, from transparency and listening to each other, not just be driven by one or two key individuals. Another kind of contributing factor, I think, for me, and I always take notice, is job adverts, specifically the way in which they're written. So very often a company will want a role to sound super exciting and attractive because they want the very best people to apply, and they'll use kind of fancy terms and buzzwords and acronyms and things like that. But what it actually can end up doing is excluding candidates who could be great. You could have someone that maybe has been out of career for a little while, they've had a career break, or they're making a move into a different space and they're lacking a little bit of confidence. And they read this job description that sounds so grand and over the top that they think, gosh, I can't possibly apply for that. I'm not going to tick all of those boxes and I can't do all of those things. But actually, if you read in between the lines and break down that role, I'm sure they can do it. And in reality, they'd be great at the role, but they discount themselves because it sounds far grander than they possibly think they can achieve. And I think that's a real shame. So I think with job descriptions, we should be far more transparent and straightforward in the way that we word them, and be honest. If it's got admin in it, say it's got admin in it. People don't mind. But I think we just need to take out some of the fancy terminology and buzzwords for some job descriptions. What's your thoughts, Ewan? Because I know you've seen some things on LinkedIn.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we work a lot with LinkedIn, and it's they put a lot of content out there, but from their research, it's evident that women apply to roughly 20% less jobs because of that, and because they're not feeling like they're ticking all of the boxes, it's putting them off applying. And further to your point, obviously we work with hundreds of clients, and there are clients who will ask for a positive bias within the recruitment cycle, and we can't do that. So I think changes like that are going to become more and more important, because they're going to have to go at other ways to try and attract a more diverse talent pool applying to their jobs. So it's not just a fact of asking us to show positive bias, it's also looking into their internal process and what they can do, that whenever they or us take that role to the market, there's going to be a more diverse pool applying to those jobs.
Yeah, look, absolutely, and a lot. You can tell a lot about a company, especially now with all the means of social media, LinkedIn, etc. as well. You can get a real feel for the company, and actually that's really important, and that's a big factor when people apply for jobs as well. So absolutely great point there as well. Okay, so what I'd really like to kind of move on to and talk about a little bit is the pay gap. I mean, we can't talk about a diversity guide without actually talking about the one thing that we know from the salary guide around how pay is a big factor. We know it's one of the biggest motivational factors for someone applying for a job. So let's talk about the pay gap. So it's a critical aspect in the diversity guide, and with the gender pay gap widening in the UK and the US. Now, I just to kind of give some perspective on those numbers, and Ewan, I'd love to get your take on this, because I know you do feel quite strongly about this as well. So I'd love to get your take. But just to give a bit of perspective, in the UK, the gender pay gap has gone up to 16% this year, as opposed to 6%. So that's basically saying 16% males are paid 16% more for like roles compared to females. In the US, the gender pay gap has slightly gone up to 11% as opposed to 10% last year. So a slight increase, although not much of a difference. France has gone up to 17%. Last year at 16%. Netherlands, we're shouting out the Netherlands today, so well done Netherlands. The gender pay gap has actually decreased to 10%, and it was 23% the year before. Ewan, in your experience, how can organizations address this issue, and what can they do in terms of their workforce and creating a bit more of an equitable workforce?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm completely honest, I think this is a really hard one to answer. I think there's probably hundreds of variables out there that is causing this, and obviously I know it's a massive research point at the minute, and hopefully as that research progresses, and hopefully our research as well, we'll be able to get more answers. But kind of the trends that we see is probably when it's more comes down to confidence and belief in terms of asking for promotions, or having the confidence to ask for a pay rise. And it'll be good to see if there is a link there, as that's what we hear most from a recruitment perspective. I think the other challenge we have is we feel that from our process, when a candidate gets an offer, a lot of those offers are based off their existing salaries. Rarely is it not taken into consideration. Sometimes it isn't, but a lot of the time I feel it is. So the challenge we have there is that if the pay gap starts from day one, then it's only going to get bigger and bigger. And I think there has been things globally in order to change this. So I know in the US, for example, there's changes in terms of advertising jobs with salary, and also declaring salaries and expectations. And I think for the UK to progress, and Europe as well, I think similar actions are going to have to come into place there, because you're never going to fix the pay gap if you just keep offering someone based off their previous salary. Rarely is it done on actual capabilities and value they're going to bring into the team. And that's probably more evident this year as well, when the cash has been a bit tighter, and there has been restrictions there, and various different approvals to go through, and obviously in the business numbers are what's looked at. But I think that's a big bugbear of mine, to be honest. Amy, what do you think?
No, completely echo your points. It's really challenging for large organizations to tackle this in kind of one fell swoop. The answer isn't as simple as everyone gets lifted to the same across the board. to be honest, I'm not sure where a company would even start with that. The audit task would be just colossal, and how do we even fairly judge that one role is comparable to another? It can't be just on job title, because we all know that every role has great variety within it, and even if on paper you're doing the same thing as someone else, in reality that's not quite true. I'd actually be keen to know if anyone on the call has seen companies do this really well, or has had experience of it themselves. I think it'd be really interesting. So please do add to the chat if you have. Look, for us at Rockborne, it's easy. Being honest, we're new, we're small. We set out our stall early for this, and we were able from day one to put in a proper pay structure. But for a well-established global organisation, it's a huge undertaking. But it, of course, doesn't mean that it shouldn't be addressed. And to some of your examples, in some countries, we are making ground. So it's something we certainly should be looking at a bit more closely.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks both. It's a tough one, isn't it? And I don't think it's an easy one to answer. So yeah, as Amy said, we'd love your thoughts on the chat, where organisations have done this well and not well, and we'll certainly share those wider as well. I do want to take a moment to address the ethnicity pay gap, and Amy, I might actually come to you for this, because I know you were looking at it and you were commenting it to me a few days back as well. But this is the first time that as a survey we've actually gathered in-depth insights into this, and from what I can see, the UK is making some progress, but there are still disparities and work to do. What was it that stood out to you in that space?
Yeah, no, I found it really interesting. The UK's kind of overall ethnicity pay gap in the data industry is down to 6%. So it's a good improvement, but there are some nuances that we should dig into. So, for example, Asian and Asian British data professionals are now the highest paid ethnic group in the industry, receiving an average salary of 79,900. And that's closely followed by professionals from mixed or multiple ethnic groups. And then the specialisms breakdown is kind of even more fascinating, really. So in the digital analytics space, the gap is only 2%, and professionals from mixed or ethnic groups earn 15% more than their white counterparts. We see a similar story in marketing and analytics and risk analytics as well. And then if we look in the tech sector, the pay gap is more than double the industry average at 13%, with a 22% difference for mixed or multiple ethnic groups. So when I was looking at that, I was sort of thinking, where is some of that coming from? And I wonder, could there be a cultural piece here? Asking for a certain salary or a pay rise can feel incredibly awkward and is a really difficult conversation to have. So you've got to, you need to be confident and you need to be direct in some of those conversations, and that can make it quite fruitful. And I think potentially culturally, some are better than others at doing this. It feels more natural. So yeah, I just wonder if there are some lessons that we can learn from each other in that way.
Just to add as well, from a Netherlands and France perspective, unfortunately, we can't get the full picture there just due to the regulatory laws in the EU across the fact we could only factor in disability and gender. So that's why we don't have that data that we've got on the UK.
Brilliant. Thank you both, and thank you for your insights on that as well. I can't believe we're already kind of half into this LinkedIn Live. The time's flying, and there's quite a bit to get through. So just a reminder for those online watching, if you do have any questions around the guide or anything for the three of us, please do drop it in the comments, and we'll try and get through to it as well. I want to kind of move on to the leadership divide a little bit and have a bit of a conversation around this. So across the regions, there's a consistent trend of diversity across all the different elements that we've spoken about and wider, around diversity decreasing the more senior you get for senior roles. So, and that challenge. The challenges there persist, and I see them persisting if you look at the trends as well, and you do see white males dominating the most senior positions in organizations when it does come to data tech and otherwise as well. Now, one factor that I think plays a role in this is mentorship. Now, alongside raising a family and other cultural differences that we pointed out, some groups may feel less confident for higher positions. But mentorship across the data sector, we've seen has slightly increased in the UK. It's gone from 24% to 25%, both in the male and female mentorship question. We see it does increase, but males still tend to have more take part in mentorship more than females, so 19% versus 13%, and that could be a factor in what we're seeing in the gender disparity or the diversity as you get more senior in roles and stuff as well. I'd love your thoughts from both of you around that, because that doesn't seem to be changing. What would be your thoughts? Maybe coming to Amy yourself first.
Yeah, I think mentoring is incredibly important. If I kind of reflect back in my own career, I've been fortunate enough to have a number of mentors who've helped me, who've guided me. Some of those have been provided to me through various programs and things like that, but mainly I've actually reached out myself, and that's not the most comfortable thing to sometimes do, because you feel like you might get kicked back a little bit or rejected. But actually today, and my experience has been that whenever you ask someone to be a mentor, or when I've been asked personally myself, it's so flattering. You say, gosh, me, thank you. So it's a really positive thing to do for both parties. And I think it's really important to try and create, I kind of call them your cheerleaders throughout your career, this kind of group of people who can be from different walks of life, different industries that you've met along the way, that are your great sounding board, are there to cheer you along. I joked about this the other day. Think Taylor Swift and her squad. That's kind of what you're aiming for. They're the kind of people that you want around you to just really give you great sound advice and be on the kind of end of a phone when you've got something you want to chat through. So mentorship is hugely important.
Ewan, yeah. What would your thoughts be on that?
I suppose, obviously, speaking less from a mentorship side and more on the leadership side of people in those roles, I think change takes a long time. Ultimately, the leadership level is where we're going to see the diversity numbers go up. That's going to be last, ultimately. So the most important thing at the minute is to have that trickle effect coming from junior to mid to then the leadership side. So I think looking at the leadership split, I think that's something we need to look at in probably 5 to 10 years time, realistically, once initiatives and things are in place. But it's important for us then to keep seeing. So a drop of 11% in the UK this year at entry level, that's going to have a massive knock-on effect in 5 to 10 years time. And that's why it's really important that every year this is happening. Otherwise, that problem is not going to fix, because the only way you can be a leader is if you've been there and done that and you've got the experience behind you. And if people aren't getting those opportunities from a non-male background, then how is it going to change at the top? It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, look, exactly right, and it's such a good point, right? You have to start, if you want to make a change to the most senior positions. There's lots you can do, but a good argument is actually start from early careers and build up. So actually, they're the numbers that we want to see having more diversity in it. And back to my very first point that I made, whether we should be having these conversations or not, absolutely we should, and continue to encourage it in that space as well. And Amy, your point around mentorship is absolutely spot on, because actually I feel if anyone ever reaches out to me, I feel very honoured, and I take those responsibilities very seriously if that does happen, and I know you do as well. When people do reach out to you, and it's been a big part of my career and helped me with my confidence as well. So actually, as someone who is introverted and I do talk about this quite a bit, mentorship and having that kind of sounding board or cheerleader squad. I never thought I would mention Taylor Swift on a diversity and data LinkedIn Live, but having that cheer squad with you is so important, and it gives you that confidence to have those open conversations as well. We have had a question. Thank you, Jake, for your question. But we'll maybe start with you in this time and get your thoughts on it. So Jake has asked, what are some of the biggest challenges companies are facing when trying to implement the right strategies to achieve better diversity practices? So your thoughts, Ewan.
Big question. I'm sure there's a number of different things. I think patience is probably a massive challenge for companies. historically they've got a process that work, and it gets bums on seats really quickly. And when changes are made to that, there ultimately is going to be challenges, there is going to be delays, and it's actually making the sacrifice to change those strategies and understand there's going to be pains that come with that. So there's an element of that, and also making sure that everyone in the company's bought in, I think, is really important. Amy mentioned about a lot of the time is given to HR professionals and they're told to look after that. But if you've got half of the leadership team on board and half of the leadership team not on board, it's just not going to work. Everyone needs to be on the same page. And I think internal communication and helping people see the full picture and understand why it's important is a massive learning piece. And again, that takes time and it'll take patience as well. So, I mean, that's one thing I would say, Amy. I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think, for me, for a company, I think just the topic of diversity itself is the challenge. It can be quite an emotive and quite a diversive topic sometimes. There's a lot of talk at the moment around good DEI versus bad DEI, and I think companies sometimes become very concerned around doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing, and not approaching it in the right way, and that's really hard. And there isn't necessarily always a right way, and I think that is one of the biggest challenges. And I think what we try and do here is we don't know the answers. We don't pretend that we do know all the answers, but we just try and listen, and we try and talk to our people, and we try and ensure that everybody that comes into the organisation is in the same mindset of that diversity is important. And they may have different leans on what type of diversity is important. That's absolutely fine, but they understand the value of it. And I think that's the key. But I think just the topic itself is probably the biggest challenge of actually feeling comfortable talking about it among a group of employees.
I think spot on point, and hopefully, Jake, that's answered your question as well. And openly, I don't think there is a if there was a very clear answer to the challenge, I think everyone would be doing it. But for me, patience is a big part of it as well. But actually, as we probably mentioned throughout here, it's less for me about hiring diverse candidates to meet a threshold or a target, but doing it because of the value that a diverse workforce will bring to your teams or to your organizations and so on. I mean, a practice that we use at Rockborne is if you've got value to add, you should come around the table and have the conversation. We've got no bias towards only certain people in the hierarchy. As an example, a certain age group can come around the table. It's if you've got value to the conversation, you can come. And I think that's the key for organizations, and it is a conversation to have, and an open and honest one as well. Thank you both of you.
Sorry, I was just gonna add one more thing, and it's kind of further to Amy's point, but some companies just actually don't really know where to start, and that's why I think it is really important when companies do have strategies in place that they're broadcasting them either on LinkedIn, through the website, to help companies learn from them, and also the mistakes even that they've made as well, so that companies don't make the same mistakes. So it's kind of going back to that collaborative approach, that the more material out there of the wins and losses, the more companies are going to be able to actually implement strategies and have a basis to start that strategy on.
Spot on. And you know what, if you look at other walks of business and life in general, right? Like if I mention personally in my kind of data career, what's helped me massively as I've gone into slightly bigger teams, bigger positions, more leadership type positions, is actually talking to peers in other industries and other organizations and actually learning from them around what's worked well and what hasn't. And I think that the same applies in diversity strategies and any other strategies in business as well. So which is why actually when I tend to do talks now, I actually talk a lot about what I've done wrong or what I could have done better, because that's almost it's more valuable to the listener, as opposed to standing there saying, look how brilliant I am and look what I did great. Very few examples of that anyway, but actually I do talk a lot about kind of things that I could have done better, and I think it's a really, really spot on point there. So thank you, Ewan. So So kind of moving into the kind of last section of this live today, I'd like to get everyone's thoughts on what they think the future looks like in this space, based on the analysis, based on the guide, and for me to give a perspective before kind of moving on to a view. I think it's essential that we establish the data industry's growth and innovation, and when we think about that, it's actually underpinned by diverse and inclusive talent. There's no other way around it, and as we have to be championing it at every level. At Rockborne, we obviously do that from an early career space, but really thinking about the value of diversity across all the different elements. So, as I said in the beginning, for gender diversity, it's not only binary, it's non-binary as well. We need to think about ethnicity as diversity. We need to think about background. So typically STEM graduates will move into data. Look at non-STEM as well. We've had huge successes here at Rockborne from non-STEM graduates as well as STEM. So let's consider those. Let's consider career changes. There's an infinite number that I can't mention, but for me, I think it's essential that that's the foundation of what we do. And if we want to get better from a tech, we know data and innovation is going faster and faster, especially, I mean, I'll mention AI, but especially with the introduction of some of the generative AI stuff, we know innovation is moving fast, and it's going to continue to move faster if you have the right talent around it. So for me, that's kind of where it's going. Would love to get your thoughts. Amy, why don't you go first on this one?
Yeah, I think kind of where we're headed, we're seeing small incremental improvements every year, and I think that will continue. I think what's really important is that we don't become complacent because we see these small jumps. So we need to keep our foot on the gas. We need to keep moving in the right direction, and we've just got to keep trying and keep talking about it. Change just won't happen overnight. Over the course of my career, I've only ever worked in male-dominated industries, but in each one of those, I've always seen year on year steps in the right direction. And yes, I'd love it to come far quicker, but actually it is all moving in the right direction. And I think if we all kind of play our part, I think that's really important. So keep going, keep doing what we're doing, keep speaking about it, and be brave, I think is really important. And I think that hopefully is what the future is going to look like. Ewan?
Yeah, I mean, I think the future's great, and obviously, as you mentioned, Waseem, everything's moving really fast. But I also think it's important to look at the future in baby steps as well. Looking 10 years ahead, especially when it comes to this, probably we want to be looking at the next year and taking it on a year-by-year basis, because it's got to consistently get better. Because if one year doesn't, then it has a massive knock-on effect in the future. So, yeah, I think the future is obviously important, but I think we should also be looking at the short-term future as well, rather than just, what's going to be happening in 10 years. So it's just, keep doing what we're doing, but keep trying to improve that. But as Amy said, just make sure that it's always at the forefront of what you're doing. Otherwise, if it drops off, there's massive knock-on effects from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think look, there's also synergies here as well. We talk about data. Look, we're a data-driven company, and we talk about data a lot. But I think there's a huge amount of synergies in different lines of work as well. So actually, we talk about diversity in data. There is diversity in tech, diversity in digital, and that's only going to get further and further and become a more predominant conversation. And within data, there's diversity in data analytics, there's diversity in marketing analytics, and then the conversation becomes around data science. So I think for me, it's absolutely right that we're thinking about almost a step-by-step thing, because the industry is changing as well. But to also keep challenging ourselves in this space to try and make it better and actually bring that thought around the table and stuff as well. We have had another question. Thank you, Kalina, for the question. So Kalina's question is, what would you say about the apologies, I can't read English, but what would you say about the difference between diversity and inclusion? I think a lot of companies use them interchangeably. Amy, I'm going to come straight to you, because you and I were having a conversation about this less than 24 hours ago. So I'd love your take on, because they go hand in hand, right? And you can't do one without the other. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, the way in which I always look and break it down is that very often, companies say they set a target and they say, hey, we have to have X percentage of women. We need more women in the organization. And they'll task their recruitment teams to go out and find these great individuals. And they will go and do that. But then if they bring them into the organization and the organization isn't prepared and isn't ready to support the new diverse pool of individuals, it doesn't work very well. So for me, it's like a chicken and egg situation. You've got to get your house in order first before you start bringing in diversity. You need to be inclusive already in your organization. Doesn't mean you've got to be 100% perfect, but you've got to be already on that journey. You've got to get people all on the same page, excited by the prospect of bringing more diverse talent in. But you've got to have inclusion there at the core of who you are before you start, because otherwise you have, and I've seen this happen so many times, companies will sign up to agendas, say, hey, we're going to recruit 1,000 this and 100 that, and then they join and go, this is not what I thought it was going to be. I walk into a room and nobody looks like me, no one speaks like me, I haven't got role models, I haven't got peers. So you've got to start putting some of those pieces in place first before you drive these kind of huge diversity agendas. It is my personal view.
And Amy, just to kind of follow up on that, because again, we were having a very in-depth conversation yesterday about this as well. Kind of, what would be your tips in creating kind of an inclusive environment in a workforce? So hopefully, Clean, I'm building on your question a little bit here. But what would be your tips in actually starting that for both large organisations and smaller? What are the simple things that you can do to create that inclusive environment in your workplace?
For me, there's probably two things. One is, when you think about diversity and inclusion, don't think of it just as an initiative on a piece of paper that only sits within the people space. Think of it in everything that you do. So that could be in your sales process, the way you speak to your clients. It could be really silly things, and you may have heard us talk about this before, but making sure that you've got provisions in the office for the people that you have. I have a really silly but sweet story from an individual who came to us one day and said, oh my goodness, I wore a new pairs of shoes to work, they're absolutely killing my feet, I went to get some plasters and you had plasters at the right skin tone for me, and they were over the moon. And it's such a silly, simple thing, but it's what we've tried to do, is think about diversity in every element of a business, and it not just be this kind of strategy that sits on a document somewhere that the people department are responsible for. So think about it in everything you do. And the second one is, be a good role model around it. And it's really, and that sounds really stupid and really simple, but it is. So, go be open-minded, listen to people, be inquisitive. If you do that, it rubs off on all of the people around you. So really straightforward things that could be a really simple start to thinking about a more inclusive workforce.
Amazing, thank you so much. We're actually fast running out of time, so I'll try and squeeze in another question. Perhaps I'll come to you with this, Ewan. So thank you again for those putting the questions in. So what can I do as an employer to attract more diverse talent, given that we cannot have positive bias from our recruitment partner?
There's a number of different things that I think employers can do. I think a lot of it comes down to your brand. So I think it's really important, for example, if you're on LinkedIn, that you're not just using LinkedIn to advertise jobs. I think it's really important that you post content from your staff, from your projects you're working on, so that when people are going to apply for a job, they can get a much bigger picture of what you actually do as a business and what people are doing there day to day. If they feel more related to that, it's more likely they're going to apply for your job. I think other things that companies can do is, obviously you mentioned positive bias there, but there's also unconscious bias. So I think some companies we're working with at the moment, they strip off what university people have gone to, they strip off what company they've worked at, and they just focus on, from a degree standpoint, what they've actually done, and then also from a job perspective, what they've worked on, what they've achieved. And there's no guarantee to say that will improve your results, but it'll certainly eliminate the fact that if you personally have a preference to STEM background, but you need to open your horizons, getting rid of that to start with is going to stop making you think about that. And you can then just hire a candidate based purely on their ability and their match for what you're looking for. other things as well, like going to university events, get yourself out there, meet students. Don't just focus on London. Go up to Edinburgh, go out to Manchester, Nottingham. Get teams out there spreading your brand awareness as well, because all it takes is one student to get a job at your company and then tell their alumni, and all of a sudden, you're the face of that university in terms of an employer that people want to work for. So yeah, there's a number of different things. I'm sure there's a lot more, but I think those are good starts.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ewan. We have got. I said the last one was the last question, but this one's. We'll take one more. I think we can squeeze one more in. We'll keep talking until they shut us off, right? So one last question. Thank you, Meg, for your question. So do you think there is a lack of awareness about diversity? And it's so important, especially so important in data in particular, or are businesses willing but unsure on how to do so? So I can give a perspective, and Amy, I'd love to get your take on this, because you've come from the talent side and come into data. You now are a proud data person. I think you said the other day. So well, I'd certainly give a perspective on it. Is there a lack of awareness? I don't think there is a lack of awareness. Well, I'd like to think there isn't a lack of awareness on it. I do think, however, people are sometimes not sure how to start or how to go about it, which is the theme certainly that are coming back in the questions today and the guide and stuff as well. And almost getting organizations to think about it in a different way. It's not about going out and saying, I'm going to hire 10 females in my team, or I'm going to go out and hire 10 this type of person in my team. It's more rooted into what are you trying to build as a data team, or what are you trying to build? What's the value that you want around the table, and more so than that. So I'd like to believe there is awareness of it. I think there's a lack of how to go about it. Is kind of probably where I come from. Amy, your take.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think I don't think there's a lack of awareness of the concept of diversity. I think there's a lack of awareness sometimes of the real value that it can add, and understanding and appreciating that. And I think some people, and I have seen it in prior organizations and different companies that I've worked with before, where we still get, and I think you were talking about this as well when we were chatting the other day, that we still get, companies say things like, hey, I only want them to have gone to this university or been part of this club, and all of these kind of things. So that does still exist, and that is still around, and that's hugely frustrating. And sometimes you can take people on a journey and educate and work with them, and sometimes you can't. And that is hard to manage. So I think people understand that diversity is there and is important, but they don't necessarily understand how they can really value add in their organization. And sometimes there's resistance just because people want to be resistant, and then sometimes there's resistance because, to your point, they don't know how to move it forward. And as I said before, there's not one right route. There's lots of different ways you can tackle it.
Amazing. Thanks, Amy. And we'll go on to the next question, because it's actually linked. So Olivia, thank you for your question. The question from Olivia is, how can employees advocate for more DE&I and bring it into the workplace if it isn't already being implemented? Ewan, I'd love your take on this, because you work with lots of organizations of different sizes. I guess it's different if it's being driven from the top in a way, versus if you're an employee and you want to advocate for more of it. What would be your kind of tips?
I think it's really important, if you're an employee, to actually talk about it and have the confidence to go speak to people higher up the chain to make change. Just because a company hasn't done it doesn't mean they're doing that out of ignorance. It could just be a lack of awareness. I think also, there's loads of events across the country that really help with how you can do this. And if you are going, bring a few people along, try and get more people involved in what you want to achieve. And also, just because you're an employee and not at the top, it doesn't mean that you can lead those initiatives and get stuck into actually managing that and creating that environment within your workplace. So yeah, I mean, I think it's awareness and just having the confidence to bring these things up. And if you get knocked back once, that doesn't mean that you don't bring it up to someone else or try again. Just keep pushing that, because it is important, and companies are aware of that. So just because they don't have it, don't just take that as ignorance. It's just making them aware of what you would like to see and what your other employees would like to see as well.
Thanks, Ewan. And yeah, Amy, we've seen this at Rockborne, haven't we? Where actually people, we've got quite an open door policy here, and actually people do come talk to us about ideas, and we've had everything from kind of lots of great food being done at kind of festive occasions from different cultures and religions, etc., all the way through to events being run by our employees as well. Would you like to add anything to that one?
Yeah, I think the only thing for me, and you and I specifically have spoken about this before, and we encourage our consultants to do this, is for what I call it being a flag bearer, for want of a better phrase. And this has happened to me many times. I know it's happened to you many times, where you're asked to be the poster campaign for something. In my case, I end up with rainbows behind my head and the LGBTQ plus stuff and all these kind of things. And I've always shied away from it and gone, oh God, I don't really want to be that person. It's not in kind of my nature. But actually, sometimes being the example, so whether you want to really drive the female agenda or a certain cultural agenda, sometimes being the flag bearer, if you're comfortable doing it, stepping forward and saying, actually, this is something really interesting about me and something that I'm really passionate about and the core of who I am, is really important. It may lead to you being put on a poster, but there's worse things that can happen, I'm sure.
Fantastic. Okay, look, I'm getting threatened from the background that they will actually close me off from talking. To be honest, it's their fault. They put me as host, so I'll take it. But look, what a brilliant conversation. I think there's so many topics, and we didn't even scratch the surface on a number of different diversity bits around benefits, disability, and many more. For our listeners, thank you for joining. Don't forget, you can download the Global Diversity Guide. You can do it on our website. I'm sure our lovely team will put it in the comments as well. So please do download it, have a read, let us know what you think. Come back with suggestions and questions as well. We'd love to hear from you. And look, all that's left to say is thank you so much, Amy and Ewan. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you both on the show today. And thank you for our audience joining in as well. Have a great day.